this week we read Parshas Bamidbar. Parshas Bamidbar is one of the parshas in which we don't even have one of the Taryag mitzvahs Shebetoira, which source is in this week's parsha. So Parshas Bamidbar doesn't have any of the magnificent list of Taryag mitzvahs. However, we will discuss a fascinating topic, which is part of Avodas Halavim. If Chumash V'Yikra is defined as Toras HaKoyanim, in a way, one could define Chumash Bamidbar as Toras Halavim, because most of mitzvahs Halaviyah are in this week's parsha. V'Halaviyim yachanu savav leMishkan Oedis, v'al yeh ketzef al hadas b'nei Yisrael, v'shomer Halaviyim es Shmiras Mishkan Oedis. This is one of the sources of Shmiras HaMikdash, and that is one of the fundamental duties of the Leviim. In the Hemshech of this week's parsha, Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Lemor, Hakra v'smate Levi, v'amadetu oisei lefnei Aaron HaKohen, v'sheresu oisei, they should serve Aaron HaKohen. Part of their service, v'shamru es mishmartoi, וסמשמרס כלו עדו לפני אוהל מועד לעבוד את עבודת המשכן, ושמרו אז כל כלי אוהל מועד וסמשמרס בני ישראל. But the most important source of this mitzvah, as I mentioned before, is in Parshas Korech. ויאמר בני ישראל על מוישה לאמור, הן גבנו, עבדנו, כולנו עבדנו, כל הקורא והקורא על משכן השם ימוס, האם תמנו לגבויה? The Leviim came to complain, not the Leviim, but actually the people. We cannot go into the Beis HaMikdash. As Zar is prohibited, Atome is prohibited, and people will die, we will perish. ויאמר השם אל אהרון, אתה ובניך ובית אביך איתך, תישאו את עוון המקדש. וגם אחיך ומטה לוי שבט אביך הקרב אליך וישרסוך, ושמרו משמרתך ומשמרס כל האוהל. Shmiras HaMikdash. What is the essence of this mitzvah? What is it about? So the Shoimrim are like sentinels, officers that safeguard the Mishkan. What is their job, actually? What is their duty? The Rambam, Perek Ches, Hilchas Beis HaBchira, Halacha Aleph, and I read the Rambam. Shmiras HaMikdash mitzvah sasei, v'af al pi she'en sham pachad ma'oyev v'lo melistim. It's not that we're afraid of our enemies or of thieves. She'en shmira zoi elo koved loi. It's all about the honor and the glory of the Beis HaMikdash. Ein oidoi mepalten sheyesh olav shoimrim, mepalten she'en olav shoimrim. A palace that has shoimrim, that is part of Kvoid HaMikdash. If any of you ever visited the Buckingham Palace and saw the changing of the guards there, they're dressed up with beautiful uniforms, very colorful, and each of them carries his weapon. But if something is going to happen there, whether it's a terror attack or thieves or a burglary, I don't think they know what to do. I don't think they're authorized to do anything. That is an example of Einay Doim Palten Sheyesh Olav Shoimrim Palten She'en Olav Shoimrim. And the Rambam voices his opinion once again and say, for a mitzvah Seichov Beis, She'en HaShmira Elo L'chabdoi, L'gadloi, U'leroi Memoi. The Ramban ala Torah, and I'm quoting the Ramban, V'tam v'shomro Leviim es Mishmeres Mishkan Oedis, She'yishmeru Oiseh Balaylo, וילכו סובב המשכן כמו שאומרו הכהנים שוימרים מבפנים והלוויים מבחוץ, והם כולם כשוימרים לראש המלך. The king doesn't move without bodyguards, and that is part of Kvoid Malchus. Sefer HaChinuch, as always, follows in the footsteps of the Rambam, as in any other mitzvah. So according to the Ramban and the Sefer HaChinuch, Shmiras HaMikdash is all about kavod. However, in Parshas Korech, the Pasuk seems to tell a story. that the Jews, the people, came to Moshe and Aaron and they complained. There's going to be a plague. There's going to be a tragedy. People are coming in and out, and we don't have the entitlement. It's a prohibition. We can't go into the Mikdash. So, Haim Tamnu Legvaya. Is our destiny to perish, to die? And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe, Hafked es Aharon, you shall have the Levim, Vehem Shamru es Mishmeres Oyel Moyed. The Rambam in Moed Nevuchim, I quoted two Rambam, Sefer HaMitzvos, Mishnah Torah, but the Rambam, Chele Gimel, Perek Mem Hey, and as I explained many times, Chele Gimel Moed Nevuchim is all about Tamei Mitzvot, and I quote the Rambam, Omnam Hayoisa Shmira Vasivuv Sovev LeMikdash Tomid, Lechabed Oisai Ulefa'aroi, which is the same as the Rambam writes in Hilchas Beis HaBchira and in Sefer HaMitzvos, but he adds on, V'shelo yehersu hascholim gam kein, v'hatmeim elov, v'lo be'et ha'aninut, v'kol mi shelo yerochatz gufoi. They also are responsible that all those that are prohibited from coming into the Mishkan shouldn't come in. So the Rambam, his first explanation coincides with what he says in the other sources, but the second explanation is what the Pasuk says. So how would the Rambam and the Ramban and the Chinuch explain the Psukim in Parshas Koinach? I want to voice two different explanations. Number one, it is detailed in Masechet Tomid and in Masechet Midas exactly what is the function of Shomerei HaMikdash. Begimel Makoymes HaKoyanim Shomrim, Ubechof Aleph Makoymes HaLevim Shomrim. And there's a very detailed rule exactly where the Shomerei HaMikdash was standing, by the She'orim, by the gates, and by the corners. Those that standing next to the gates, maybe they have a functional duty of preventing or warning those that aren't authorized, those that aren't permitted to come in. They should stay outside. But those at the corners, ein yoytze ve'ein bo, there's no possibility to get into the Mikdash there. Those were l'chvoid habayis. And because many of the points of Shmira had nothing to do with getting in and out, that is why the Rambam's fundamental opinion is it's more about l'chabdoi, l'gadloi, u'leroi meboid. But they might also have a secondary duty, which really is preventing those that are prohibited from coming in, preventing them from coming in. Like the Rambam writes in Moed Nevuchim. Approach number two would be this. It is clear both in the Rambam and in the Ramban that the mitzvah of Shmiras HaMikdash is b'laylo v'loi b'yom. Perek Ches Halacha Beis in Rambam, and the Ramban I just quoted a moment ago. Sheyishmeru oisoi b'laylo. B'laylo, the gates of the Azorah were closed. There is no possibility that anybody gets in or out by night. So it cannot be that their job, their duty, their responsibility is to prevent people from coming in, because by day there was no mitzvah of Shmira. By night you can't get in or out anyway. So this is a very reasonable thought, in my opinion. The Mishkan was different, because the Mishkan Shebamidbar had no gates, had no doors. It was open by day and by night. So there really was a reasonable risk. People that are Tomei, Lelo Rechitzes Aguf, they might come in and that is a prohibition, and they're Chayev Misa B'dei Shemayim. So they really complained and worried, Aim Tamnu Legvaya. But that is only Mishkan Shebamidbar. That is the Maseh Shehoyu Kach Hoyu. That is what we learn in Parshas Koyach. But this mitzvah applies to all the ages. And in Beis Eilamim, once they got to Yerushalayim and they built the Beis HaMikdash, there's no risk at all. There is no possibility that people will get in by night, because the doors were locked by night. And therefore, the Doris Olam, the definition of this mitzvah is only Kvoid HaBayis. Ein oidoi mepalten sheyesh olav oimrim, lepalten she'ein olav shomer. And why is the mitzvah only by night? The Minchas Chinuch in Shin Peches wonders. Only the Mefarish, who was one commentary, we don't even know who he was, but a Masechet Tomid, one of the Rishonim we have is Perish, and he says the mitzvah Shmiras HaMikdash is bein b'yoyim bein b'laylo. But the Rambam, the Ramban, the Chinuch, and the Rosh, they all say by night and not by day. And why is that? So according to the Rambam and the other Rishonim we quoted, if the mitzvah of Shmiras HaMikdash is only about Kvoid HaBayis necessitates Shmira by night. By day, there is no greater Kvoid HaMikdash than Koyanim be'avidosam, Leviim b'shiram ve'bezimram Yisrael b'mamodam. Is there any bigger kavod and glory than Avodas HaKoyanim v'halavim? So the Beis Mikdash was a very busy place all day. Hatovas haneres v'adlokas haneres, tomet shel shachar, tomet shel beinu abayim, k'toires, boiker ve'erev. And all the nedorim v'nedavas, and the chatas and the osham, and so many karbonas that were brought every day. But by night there are no avodas, nothing. The only avodah that was performed by night is evorim shenishtayru. If there are some parts of Besar HaKodesh that they didn't have time to put in the Mezmeach Bayom, they do it by night, but it was a very quiet place all night. And the Rosh defines the mitzvah of Shmiras HaMikdash, shelo yasichu da'at mimeno. There should be no hesach hadat. Hesach hadat by night. By day, there is no opposite to hesach hadat than avodas Beis HaMikdash. But coming back to our original point and argument, if the mitzvah of Shmiras HaMikdash is balaylo, then it cannot be that their duty is to prevent people from coming in, because you cannot come in by night. So my interpretation would be, in Parshas Koirach, the Mishkan Shebamidbar, yes, their job was to keep people out, but not in Beis Elomim. Once they got to Yerushalayim and they built the Beis HaMikdash, Beis HaShabono Shloimo, there's no risk at all people will get in by night because the gates are closed, and therefore the mitzvah is only L'chabdoi, L'gadloi, U'Lereimoi. And who were Shomerei HaMikdash? Haroivim hoyu mishamrim. And once again, most of the Rishonim, Rosh Rabbeinu Gershom, Ravid, they all say the Roivim were Pirchei Kona, they were Ktanim. They weren't adults. They were the young children. The adults had different jobs, different duties. Mishorerim, Vishoarim. They opened the gates, they closed the gates, they gave song. They played instruments, vocals, and Shmiras HaMikdash was upon the young people, those that weren't even Gedolim. And the Mishnah LaMelech and Perek Ches Beis HaBchira wonders, a kot is not a bar chiyuva. How could you be Makayim and Mitzvah Sazeh Misha eneno bar chiyuva? And my response to this question is a Yesod Godol. And I wonder, the Mishnah Melech was a Godel Shebegdolim, but obviously he didn't realize this Yesod. And I want to prove it from 6 or 7 different sources. We are all aware that there are 2 different categories of mitzvahs. One is mitzvahs to rest upon the individual. And that is the vast majority of mitzvahs of Torah. Especially the mitzvahs that are the chut hashedra, the spinal cord of avodas Hashem. Tefillah, Kriya Shema, and Mea Brochos B'Kol Yom. Tzitzis and Tefillin. Kiddush v'Havdalah, Matzah Morer, Sukkah Lulav. These are all mitzvahs that rest upon each and every individual. And then there are mitzvahs that rest upon Klal Yisrael. Kibush Eretz Yisrael. Zera Molek. Minui Melech B'Yisrael. But in between, there's a very unique and special category which we find only by a handful of mitzvahs. A mitzvah that rests not upon the individual but upon a collective, a group of people. Which group? Who is that group? It depends. It differs from one mitzvah to another. But I want to bring about 6 or 7 sources to this unique category. And when a mitzvah rests upon a group of people, there is no individual that is mechuyev. The chiyuv, the obligation, rests upon the entire group. You all bear responsibility that one of you or some of you performs this mitzvah. Not all of you need to participate. Sometimes all of you cannot even participate. But the nature of this mitzvah is responsibility. You are all responsible at the end of the day that this mitzvah should be performed by one of the group. The one or the two or the three that actually perform the mitzvah have a special schus. But it is not an individual chiyuv resting upon them. The entire group is responsible that al yedechem, mi mekem, performs this mitzvah. So whenever I give an abstract definition, people will never appreciate it until we dress it up. Or vegidim. And we need examples. Number one, achilas kochim. Who is responsible each and every day that the Besar HaKodesh should be consumed by the Kohanim? Who is responsible? Shmuel HaNavi determined Chav Dalad Mishmaros. 24 groups, families of Kohanim. Each Mishmar had 2 weeks a year of service. And they came to Yerushalayim, dedicated a week's time to Avodas HaMikdash. Each Mishmar was divided into 7 Botei Av. And each day another Beis Av was responsible. The Kohanim of the Beis Av are responsible for Achilas Kochim. And Achilas Kochim is a mitzvah asay, Psochem Nuntes, Va'ochlo Oisam Asher Kupar Behem, Kohanim Oichlem V'Balem Iskaprim. And there's also a lot of Noisa. If the basar wasn't eaten in the designated period, they're all over an alav of Noisa. So if no one had basar HaKodesh, they all were over an alav, they all mevatel mitzvah say. But not all the kohanim of the Beis Av are obligated to have a chiyuv to eat. They all are responsible that al yadam, by them, by this group, all the Besar HaKodesh should be consumed and should not be left over to the next day. So the kohanim that actually eat don't need to be moitzi the others yedei chayvosam because the others don't have a chiyuv. It is a collective chiyuv upon the entire group. There is no individual that has this chiyuv. And it's a Gemara Meforeshes, Perik Tzad, Daf Tzadik Tete Mesechet Zvochim, Rambam Perik Yud Aloch Yud Zayin Maaseh Karbonis, that Ktanim could eat kochim. And it's not a problem at all. And why not? A kotan is not a bar chiyuv. What I mean to prove is, when a mitzvah rests upon a group, there is no problem if a kotan performs that mitzvah. A kotan is not a bar chiyuv. He can't be moitzi agodel. But he could perform a mitzvah. The mitzvah isn't pasul. Einoi mitzvah v'oisa. But still, he's Jewish. And he's kosher l'achilas kodshim. He doesn't have an issur to eat kodshim. And because this mitzvah doesn't rest upon any individual, and there's no individual that is chayev lechal kodshim, then there's no problem at all if a kotan performs the mitzvah, even though he is not a bar chiyuv. Number one. Number two. Number two is very similar to number one. Who has the chiyuv of a kroves karbonis b'kol yom? Upon who does this mitzvah rest? Tomet shel shachar, tomet shel beinu abayim. If it's Shabbos or Rosh Chodesh, we have the chatos, we have the musaf, and all the other avodas of the Mikdash. Once again, same group. Koyanei HaMishmar, Beit Ha'av. The very same kahanim that have the chiyuv of achilas kochim have the chiyuv of kroves karbonis. Churen Chov Daled Umed Beis, the Gemara darshans from a posik that ktanim are posel avodas karbonis. If not for this Gzeres HaKosef, that disqualifies Ktanim from Avodas HaKarbonis, obviously, we could do the Avodah L'Yedei Ktanim. Why? They're not Bar Chiyuv. How could you perform a mitzvah by a person that is not a Bar Chiyuv? My answer is the same. There is no Kohen that has a Chiyuv to be Makrav Karbonis. It's not a Chiyuv that rests upon the individual, upon the prat. All the kohanim of the Beis Av bear responsibility that one of them, two of them, 3, 4, 5, as many as they might be, all those that want to participate and want to have a chelik in the schus. So they all bear responsibility that the avodah should be done at the end of the day But because it's not a chiyuv that rests upon the individual, there is no problem at all if a katan performs the mitzvah. So by Achilas Kotzim, the Torah did not disqualify a katan. By Avodas HaKarbonis, the Torah did. But if not, they had the Drosh and Chonach Daled, we would perform this mitzvah Lidei Ketanim, which proves the same point. Number 3, we're still in Seder Kotzim. Psochim Peches, we learn that even according to the Mandoma Sela by Savas Lavdi Orais, and there's no chiyuv to have minors ketanim eat the korban pesach. That's a machlekes negamora. But there still is a mitzvah chinuch to be mechanech v'tanim and give them part of the korban pesach. So Toises and Psochim Peches deals with the question, Shelo lemenuyav, lo yisafin lebiyadayim. Toises answers, we spoke a lot previously about the Toises, and I won't go into it today because it's not part of our sugya today. But Rabbi Loza Moshe Pinsker, one of the greatest gedolim in Lithuania more than 100 years ago, his name was Rabbi Loza Moshe Horovitz. He was the Rav of Pinsk. Pinsk is in Belarus, in White Russia. And he asks, but if a cotton eats korban pesach, it's a bitul mitzvah sasei, because there's a mitzvah say achilas pesach. The cotton is not a bar chiyuva, similar to the kasha of the Mishnah Melech. And I argue it's not a kasha at all. Well, korban pesach is different than all the other korbanos, because korban pesach does rest upon the individual, and each and every Jew is mechuyev to eat korban pesach. However, each and every individual is yotzi dechavosei bekazayis. So let's say there are 15 menuyim. Each of them has a chiyuv to eat korban pesach, but each of them is yotzi with one kazayis. You could assume that a sheep or a goat has more than 15 kazayim of meat. If each and every one of them ate a kazayis, he was yotzei's personal chiyuv. All the rests, once again, rests upon the entire group, the chabura. The chabura bears responsibility. There should be no noisa, no leftovers to the next day. The chabura bears responsibility to eat kol b'sar pesach. But that chiyuv, once again, rests upon the collective, upon a group. And when it rests upon a group, a cotton is entitled to be part of that group. Just like we proved from Achilas Kotzim and Aklavas Karbonis. Is this yesod unique to Seder Kotzim? Not really. Not really. And I want to give a few different examples. Milas haben. Kedushin Choftes we learn. The mitzvah rests upon the father of the child. But if there is no father, lo aleinu, an orphan, a yosin, or the father is in a distant country, he's lost, or the father just is not up to it and he's not interested in circumcising his son, lo aleinu, he's not a believer, then the mitzvah goes over to Beis Din. And the Rambam explains in Persha Mishnah Masechet Shabbos that Beis Din is not necessarily Beis Din per se. Beis Din means anybody that could help, that could be helpful, that could be useful. So in Avodah Zorah Chov Zayin, there's a machlekes whether a non-Jew is qualified to do milah. We paskin, he's not qualified. It's not a kosher milah. But there is one opinion that he could. He's not a bar chiyuva, but he still is not posel. Ktsois HaChoshen Shin Pei Beis says that when milah doesn't rest upon the father because the father isn't relevant, and it goes over to the Beis Din, even a cotton could do milah. And I ask once again, but he's not a bar chiyuva. You don't need to be a bar chiyuva only if a person has a chiyuv, an individual chiyuv, and he needs to be yotzi yadei chayvosai. But when the mitzvah rests upon a group, like mitzvah smila shala Beis Din kishayin av, you could do it alidei ketanim. And that is source number 4. Source number 5 brings us to Chanukah. I explained many times my understanding about the concept of ner, ish, ubeisoi. Hamahadrin madlikim ner kol echad v'yechad, but the fundamental din is ner, ish, ubeisoi. And I explained, contrary to the understanding of the Pnei Yeshua and the Sosemis, beisoi in this halacha doesn't mean his house, but rather his household. Eis Yankov ish ubeisai ba'u. They didn't carry houses on their shoulders, on their backs. Ish ubeisai. And the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah rests upon a collective. Who is this collective? The dwellers, the residents in each and every home. Usually it's family, but it doesn't necessarily need to be family. The residents, the people living in this home. And the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah rests upon the entire group. You are all responsible that there should be a Ner Chanukah al Pesach Beisim B'chutz. It's not a chiyuv on the individual. If you're 10 people, you don't need 10 Chanukias outside. It's enough one. Who is the one? It's for you to decide. Any one of you. You all bear responsibility. And if no one lit Ner Chanukah, you are all liable. You're all responsible. If one did, then everybody is okay. Not because he's moitzi them. He doesn't need intention to be moitzi them, and then don't need intent to be yoitze. That is the din of Nerisha basic. Now, what I just said is not agreed upon by everyone. I'm fully aware. When I say a chiddush, I always apologize. I never said a chiddush in my life that is agreed upon by everyone. And those that want to learn Torah, only that is agreed upon by everyone, need to be kara'im. And they need to stop with Nevi'im and Ksuvim. Because the first Mishnah is a machlokes, and the last Mishnah is a machlokes, and all the others in the middle. So I never said a chiddush that is accepted by everyone. But I do think this is the mainstream mahalach. Nerisha Beiso is a group. And that is why in Tov Reish Ayin Hey, that Ramo brings an opinion, Kotten Shegir HaChinuch could be moitzi all the others, and he could light Ner Chanukah. And the Mishnah Berurah Sif Kotten Yud Gimel wonders, Chanukah is similar to Megillah. And by Megillah, Kotten Shegir HaChinuch cannot be moitzi the others. And I say, Chanukah is similar to Megillah in many ways. Both are Persum and Issa, but not entirely. Mitzvahs Megillah rests upon each and every individual. Everybody needs to hear the Megillah. And if it's a chiyuv aprat, you cannot be yotzeh only al yedei bar chiyuv. Ner Chanukah rests upon the group, not upon the individual. And that is why it is only by Ner Chanukah that a kotten shegiyah lachinuch might be able to be moitzi all the others. Snows number 6 concludes my list, and it is different than the first 5. Yibum v'chalitza. Person passed away without children, lo aleinu. And he has brothers. So the wife needs to have either yibum or chalitza by one of the brothers. The mitzvah rests upon an entire group. Who makes up this group? The brothers of the deceased. Not each and every one of them needs to be miyabim. Chas v'sholem, that's an isra v'eshesach shaloi b'makamitzvah and erva. They all are responsible that one of them performs this mitzvah. Which one? For them to decide. If no one did it, they all bear responsibility. If one did it, kulam nifteru midei chovatam. Mitzvah begodel yabim. Yavom is the Falamet the Mishnah says, first we turn to the oldest. If he refuses, we go to the next, and then to the next. But ultimately, the mitzvah rests upon a group. And that is why Rashi's opinion, Kedushin Yutes, Yibum could be performed by a kotten, and Tosfos disagrees. Well, a kotten is not a bar chiyuva. Doesn't make a difference whether he's a bar chiyuva or not. Because the mitzvah doesn't rest upon an individual that is mechuyev lo'itzi yedei chavosai. So if I once again ask, who is the collective, who is the group? It depends on the nature of the mitzvah. The first 2 sources I quoted, Aklavas Kabonas, Achilas Kachim. The group is the Beis Av. Source number 3, Korban Pesach. The group is the Chavura. The people that got together, they bought the Korban Pesach and they bring it. They all are Shutfim. Mila, the group is everyone that Yesh Beyodo L'Sayeya. That is the concept of Beis Shechayev B'Mila. Ner Chanukah, whom does the group consist? People that live together in the home. Isha Beisoi. Yibam v'chalitza, the brothers of the deceased. But the concept is the same. When a mitzvah rests upon a group, not upon an individual, ktanim are legitimate. And therefore the kasha of the Mishnah Melech to me is not a kasha, according to this side, because Shmiras HaMikdash, just like other mitzvahs of Kodshim, rests upon a collective. Who is the collective this time? Mishpachas HaLevim, all the Levim. And they all bear responsibility that some of them, each and every night, are Mekayim, the mitzvah of Shmiras HaMikdash. That is my approach, and that is my understanding, and it is a very fundamental one. We find an interesting tshuva in Avnei Nezer Yoredei Simintov Memtes. More than 120 years ago, one of the Lithuanian Talmidei Chachamim came to Yerushalayim, like many others of Gedolah Lita and Gedolah Poland that came towards the end of their lives, Lachoinen Asafora Shali Eretz Yisrael, out of a love of the land. Reb Meshel Gelbstein from Bialystok came to Yerushalayim, and he immersed himself in Dinei HaKodesh v'HaMikdash, and he wrote a sefer called Mishkanois LaAbir Yaakov. And in this sefer, he very forcefully argued that there's a mitzvah of Shmiras HaMikdash b'zman hazeh, and we need to perform this mitzvah, and we need to appoint shomrim. And his argument was, if the Rambam writes there is Meira Mikdash b'zman hazeh, there should be Shmiras Mikdash as well. The Rambam clearly writes, and it's a Gemara, even when the Beis Mikdash is Chorav, there's Meira Mikdash. There still is a prohibition. Those that are not authorized to come into the Beis HaMikdash, you cannot come into the Makam HaMikdash, even though there is no Beis HaMikdash. So Reb Mechel from Bialystok argued the same as Shmiras HaMikdash. Is it so? So the Avnei Nezer has a very lengthy tshuva. And the beginning of the tshuva deals with the question, do they actually have a function? Or it's just Kvod HaMikdash? If they have a function, what is it? Probably to keep those away that are not authorized to come into the Beis HaMikdash. However, the Avnei Nezer concludes, Chas v'sholem, to be Mekayim the mitzvah today, because Erech in Yud Aleph, Tana Yud Zayin, Tanas Yud Zayin, Meshorer Sheshir Chayev Misa. Each Levi needs to do his unique duty. The Meshorerim, that's your job. Shoyerim, that's your duty. Meshorer Sheshir Chayev Misa. And the Avnei Nezer assumes that it was Shmuel HaNavi and David HaMelech that determined till the end of days who are the Meshorerim and who are the Shoyerim. And no Levi today would know which family he belongs to. And therefore, if he is one of the Meshorerim and he's a Shoyer, Chayev Misa. So the Avnei Nezer assumed that David HaMelech and Shmuel HaNavi determined till the end of days, Meshorerim and Shoyerim, but that does not seem to be obvious in Rambam. Perek Gimel Klei HaMikdash, Halacha Ches, the Rambam writes, Shmuel HaNavi and David HaMelech were kaveya at Sof Kol HaDoros, the Chov Daled Mishmeros, but not beyond that. And the Rambam writes, Roshei Beis Hu Av, it is only Rosh Beit Av who determines which Leviim go to the duchen to sing and to play, and which of them go to the gates to open and close. And it is up to the Rosh Beis Av, because not every Levi has a beautiful voice. Not every Levi knows how to play musical instruments. Not every Levi is strong enough to open the gates and close them. So this was not determined by Shmuel HaNavi and David HaMelech throughout the ages. This is on each and every day. Rosh Beis Av determined. The Rambam goes beyond that. And Halacha Yud Aleph, the Rambam writes, a Levi that was a Meshorer had a beautiful voice, but he lost his voice. He became hoarse. He can no longer sing. Or he had an accident and he can no longer play an instrument. The Rambam writes, he leaves the duch and he can no longer sing, but he still could be a shoyer. And all the Achronim stood the Rambam that yesterday he was a Meshorer, but today he can no longer sing, so they appoint him to go to the Shorim. Contrary to what the Avnei Nezer says. Tshuvas Beis Yitzchok deals with this question, Rabbi Yitzchok Shmalkas, or Chaim Siman Amedei, and he says, and his interpretation is, Mishoder Shashia Chayav Misa, as long as he could be a Mishoder. But if he becomes, for any reason, disqualified from being a Mishoder, then he definitely is entitled still to be a Shoyer. So according to the B'si Yitzchak, and according to what I seem to understand from the Rambam, the argument of the Avnei Nezer falls. But for a totally different reason, I think there is no mitzvah at all in our days of Shmiras HaMikdash. Going back to the very beginning of today's Shiur, it is about Kvoid HaBayis. Legadloi, lechabdoi, uleroimamoi. Let us notice the lesson of the Rambam. Legadlo, lechabdo, uleromamo. At me, at the Beit HaMikdash. The Rambam writes in Beis HaBchira, Ein oidoi mepalterin sheyesh olav shomerim, lepalterin she'ein olav shomerim. Palterin. Palterin is a palace, a castle. If there is no palace, there are no shomerim. We don't have a Beis HaMikdash. Contrary to the mitzvah of Moira Mikdash, which is not Moira of the Beis HaMikdash, but rather of Mokoim HaMikdash, and Moira Shchina, and the Shchina still dwells. So Moira Mikdash is Nogea Bisman Hazeh. Shmiras HaMikdash is the Shmira of Beis HaMikdash. We don't have a Beis HaMikdash. We don't have the Palterin, and therefore there is no need for Shomer. To me, this seems very simple. So as I mentioned at the beginning of today's Shiur, Chumash Vayikra is all about the Kohanim. Chumash Bamidbar is more about the Leviim. You heard from me many times that every Jewish home should be and could be a Beis Mikdash Ma'at. And it is our duty to sanctify our homes and to bring Kedusha and Shechina into our homes. How does one do that? So I explained many times, Beis Mikdash Ma'at kamo Beis Mikdash HaGodol. The entire of the void of the Beis HaMikdash centers around three fundamental kelim, and all the others were only supplementary. And what are those three central kelim? Menorah, Mizbeach, and Shulchan. And everybody could understand and appreciate that these three are connected: Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasadim. Which one? For which one? Goes without saying, Menorah is associated with Torah, Kiner, Mitzvah, and Torah, Oyer. Shabbos Chav Daled, Harogel Ben Er, Havana Ben Talmidei Chachamim, Chav Gimel, Baba Basa Chav Hay, Haroy Tzalach Kim Yadrim, V'Simonech, Menorah Bedorim. There are so many Mamurah Chazal that associate the Menorah with Torah. Goes without saying, Mizbeach is Avodah. Actually, Rabbeinu Yoina in the Mishnah, the beginning of Masechet Avos, clearly says, Al Shloishe Dvorim Olam Oimed, Ala Torah V'Ala Avodah means Avodas HaKarbonos. And only after Chor Beis HaMikdash it means Avodas HaTefillah. Because in Brochas Chavav we learn Tefillah is Keneged Karbonis Tiknum. So if Menorah takes Torah, Mizbeach takes Avodah, what's left for the Shulchan? It's not only a process of elimination, clear as daylight. Shulchana, Shel Odam Mechaper, Gemara and Zvochem and Chagigah of Zayin, because the Shulchan symbolizes Chnas Esarchem and Gemilas Chasadim. So if we want to sanctify our homes and bring Shechina into our homes, we need to dedicate our homes to Torah, Avodah, Gemilas Chasadim. But the question I asked today, in the Beis HaMikdash there were not only Kohanim, there were Leviim as well. And the Leviim too had a very central function. So what do we learn from Avodas HaLeviim to implement in our private homes? We have a lot to learn. So as I explained in today's Shiur, the Leviim were Shoyarim and Mishoyarim. Every Jewish home needs Shoyarim and Mishoyarim. We need gatekeepers and we need gates. This is such a dangerous time, and our children are exposed to so many awful things that we would so much prefer to prevent them from seeing and hearing and knowing. We no longer have total control, but that doesn't mean we need to lift our hands and say there's nothing to do about it. There's much to do about it. We need to build moats around our homes, and we need gatekeepers, we need shayarim. We need to decide who comes in and who stays out. Even more relevant in today's day, what comes in and what stays out. This is a dangerous time. Free access to the internet is horrific, especially for youngsters, for children, for bocher and for girls, for everyone, but especially to the young. Sreifes neshama v'guf kayim. So many awful things regarding the realm of tznius, and also regarding the realm of emunah and betachan. A child could see one picture, he could read one article, and it could have such a devastating effect on his entire life. So yes, we need shayarim, and we need to daven and try to do our best. We might not be in total control to our dismay, but that doesn't mean that you just do nothing. So one thing we learn from the Leviim to implement in every Jewish home is shayarim. But that is not enough. We need the mishayarim. The Leviim brought joy into avodas HaMikdash. Joy and happiness and excitement. The mishayarim. They were the ones that made avodas HaMikdash into a joyful experience, with their beautiful voices and their beautiful vocals and the beautiful music. And that is part of avodas HaMikdash. History proves that walls and moats could never guarantee that no one comes in. They never even could guarantee that no one gets out. You could dig tunnels under walls, you could scale walls, you could breach walls. And if children aren't happy in the homes, they will always find a way out. And if they're yearning and longing and unhappy at home, they will always find a way in to achieve their excitement and fulfillment. So we need shayarim. We need those walls, we need those moats, we need those gates. But we also desperately need the mishayarim. And a Jewish home should be the most happy home and the most joyous home in the entire world. And our children need joy and happiness. Like a flower turns to the sun, a child will always turn to where he could achieve warmth and happiness. So what we learn from the Leviim is shayarim and mishayarim. We need to share with our children simchas HaTorah and simchas HaMitzvah and the simcha of being Jewish, the simcha of being an Eved Hashem, and the simcha of the Torah way of life. Big families, happy families, wonderful relationships between parents and children, caring and compassion and warmth and simcha. That is essential. So every day in the morning we say Berachas HaTorah. Berachas HaTorah consists of 3 brachas. The first one obviously is Berachas HaMitzvah. That is the basic formula. Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav etzivanu. The last bracha, which according to Chazal is the most important, is the Berachas HaShevach. Asher bochar bono mekol ha'amim v'nosalonu esteros. Let's analyze the middle bracha. It is Berachas HaTfilah. The concept of Berachas HaTfilah is any bracha in which we not only sing the praise of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but we plea and ask and beg. Those are Berachas HaTfilah. And usually, Berachas HaTfilah, each bracha has only one bakasha. It is very uncommon to have 2 or 3 bakashas in one bracha. But this seems to be the case in the bracha of V'harevna. We have 2 distinct and different bakashas. Number 1 is V'harevnu Hashem Elokeinu es divrei torascha b'filu, and then we go on to ask nachas from our children. V'niya anachnu v'tzetzuenu v'tzetzui tzetzuenu koloni yodi shemecha. How is it that we have 2 different bakashas in one bracha? My explanation would be these are not 2 distinct and different bakashas. They are 2 sides of the very same coin. It is only if we will experience the beauty of Torah, the sweetness of Torah, and we will share this experience with our families, with our children, and a child would see how happy his father is when he said a good svara, and how joyous he is when he comes home from a daf yomi shiur, And he shares with his wife and his children what I learned today, how beautiful our Torah is. And we will share the happiness of the Torah way with our children. It is only then we could fairly expect ונהיה אנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאי צאצאינו כולנו יודעים שמך ולומדי סורסך לשמה. So these two bakoshas are two sides of the very same coin. That is what we learn from the Leviim. Shoarim u'misharerim. Let's try to safeguard our homes from all those negative, awful, horrific exposures. And let us bring happiness into our homes. Simchas HaTorah, Simchas HaMitzvah, Simchas HaAvdus. The harmony of a Jewish family, the beauty of a Torah family. And let us daven. ונהיה אנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאי צאצאינו כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי סרוסך לשמה. Have a beautiful day and a beautiful Shabbos.